And with that, I'm happy to turn over to Alex Gaus to give you the presentation for today.
All right, thank you very much. I don't think I need to say much more because I think Jeremy, you and Martin already, spilled the beans, most of it already. But either way, I'm happy that there's, such a virtual turnout, and welcome to everyone who joined this. There are basically three things that I would like to speak about in the next, 15 to 20 minutes. And after that, there's time for Q&A if need be. First, just a fairly brief background on the origins of the template, because some of the people who are on the call or on this webinar may not be too familiar with it, and just a few key ideas for you to know. Then I want to speak about the key features of the template, some of its benefits, what it does not address, and then as the kind of the third part of this webinar presentation is to kind of look into the things that ought to be kept in mind when introducing the template. So good practices that donors and partners, whoever uses the template in their own projects, what they should basically keep in mind. So with this, I think we can go to the next slide. Jeremy is handling the slides for me for technical reasons, so I think we can go to the third one directly, Jeremy. Exactly, not this one. Yes. So that's the background of the A+3 piloting in a nutshell. The starting point was the idea that a standardized template basically cuts down on duplicative reporting, and for that purpose, a colleague of mine from GPPi, she developed based on a review of, I think, around 20 donor templates or reporting templates. She basically created a menu of standardized questions, which is the A+3 template. It was then piloted between 2017 and 2019 in 3 countries, that is Iraq, Myanmar, and Somalia, mainly. And in this 2 years basically allowed us to check with users how they view this template, if they think it's an improvement, what should be changed. Now, this feedback was also then used to revise the template at the midway of this pilot. So I think overall it turned out to be a successful proof of concept. I think that's important. And I don't want to spare you the joy of reading the 2 studies that were on the other slide. It's a midterm and a final review, where there's much more detail on the pilot itself and the feedback we got. But here's some of here are some quotes from users, which I think are quite representative of the overall sentiment that users, which is partners, who had to report using the template, and donors who received reports based on the template, what they had to say about this. And I think if you go through this list, if you read it yourself, I think it's quite clear that the feedback is overly positive, and that's not a biased selection. So it's not a willful selection of only the quotes which emphasize how beneficial it was, but it's a general tendency. Of course, there were some users who were critical of the template, who had recommendations for changing that. We incorporated that, and importantly, most of those who were critical also felt this is the case because it's a new template and they were not used to it. They had reported on, they had used, certain donor templates for a fairly long time. Now this is new and it comes in, and that represents a change, which of course requires some time to adapt. My personal favorite is the second from the bottom and on the partners list, which says it's the best template I've ever worked with. I think it's a great quote. I like that very much. Also from the donors, I think the feedback we received was also quite positive. Obviously, some donors were not able to give too much feedback because they haven't received too many reports and were not able to compare that much. But we nevertheless received, I think, good information from donors who got reports based on that. And it's mainly 2 things. One, that the quality of the reports has not decreased. I think that's important. It's the same or better. Ideally, it's better. And the reports are, more structured, more digestible, at times also received in time, so there are fewer delays. And I think that's, critical, critical benefits for donors as well. So partners are overall quite happy with the template, and donors as well. Now on the next slide, it's a summary of 3 key features that users kind of emphasized after the pilot. One is ease of use, and I'll explain. You'll understand later on when I go through the structure of the template why that's the case. It's simplicity. It's a reduction of questions to the core of what is necessary. It's very comprehensible for those who have to compile reports. It's a very organized structure. The language is the language of the template is in a way that it's easy to understand also for non-native English speakers. I think that's important. So ease of use is something that partners who reported using the template emphasized. It's a focus on impact. That's also something that many of the partners are quite happy about, that it's not only talking about actions and processes perhaps, and so it has more of a focus on impact, looking at longer term changes, and it advances some good practices because it looks, for instance, on accountability to affected population, participation is covered. So the reporting has some of these features that are important already built in. Now on the next slide is also a fairly short summary on why using the A+3 template makes sense in most cases, and I'll come to that in most cases in parentheses later on. But Martin already put some of the key points together. Since it's recognized for its ease of use, it simplifies the reporting process, and that's something that a lot of local organizations that we spoke with emphasize, and also partners who partner with local organizations, is that it simplifies the compilation of information that is used for reporting, and it makes it much easier for local partners to compile that information. So essentially, it's also an enabler for much greater localization, if that's on the agenda. It increases the quality of reporting. Now, not for every report, but in general. It provides clarity to partners and helps to avoid over-reporting. That's what Martin emphasized at the beginning, that some donors are very open in the way they receive reports, and basically the partners have freedom to decide what information they want to provide. And there is a tendency to over-report. So to avoid any further questions and any follow-up questions, then partners tend to provide more information that's actually necessary, and that also creates an increasing burden for the partners. And to avoid that, you can just provide them with a clear set of questions, or just simply give them the option to say, well, you can choose your own format, or you use the A+3 format. So even for donors who don't have any specific reporting guidelines, there is a use case for using that template. Now, these are all individual benefits basically for specific partners working on specific projects, but there's also a more systemic benefit, which is that if more donors use the same template, it's obviously much easier in general for partners to provide narrative reports, simply because they're very used to the information they need to provide. You can already know from using the template once, this is the type of information. Now, obviously you don't provide the same information, which is relevant from one project to the other. So it's not copy paste, but it gives you at least assurance that if you provide this certain level of detail, that's sufficient in general cases. And one key benefit is also it just requires much fewer trainings to work with specific donors who maybe have a tendency to have fairly complicated reporting process. What Martin also said, low-hanging fruit almost on the ground. We'll come to that. Why is that the case? It requires actually fairly little action on the donor side to use it, and it's a fairly easy way to achieve that. So, these are kind of the immediate benefits of the template. I haven't yet said why it's called 8+3 template. Maybe some of you know, some don't. I'll answer that in a second, but what I want to do now is to basically walk you through the features of the template, how it is actually structured, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, and the good practices that should be kept in mind when using the template. Now, why is it called 8+3? You see the first bullet point on the top basically reveals that. It's called that way because it's the maximum number of questions that should be asked from a menu of 8 core and 6 additional questions. The 8+3 template is essentially a list of questions which you can choose from. And I think that's critical to remember. It's not a set template with 8+3 questions, and you have to use those, but it's a very flexible tool. So you can choose the questions you require to cover your information needs. You can choose up to 8 of the core questions, and you can choose up to 3 of the additional questions out of 6 options. So the maximum using the template ideally is 11 questions, but you can always go fewer. And I think it makes good sense depending on the current status of a project that has to be reported on. Obviously, if it's a quarterly midterm report, you wouldn't ask all 8+3 because some of the questions out of this list simply don't apply to midterm reviews. And I think that's just critical to remember, that there is a lot of flexibility built in. And that brings me to the last 2 bullet points that are important. Beyond choosing the questions appropriate for information needs, users, donors are free to decide on the frequency with which they require narrative reports. Obviously, it's ideal if the frequency is not too high. Many partners find it overly the frequency is overly high if it's weekly, monthly, at times also quarterly reporting. The level of detail is also something, the level of detail that's required on each question is also something that donors basically have flexibility on. Now, the template makes a recommendation for the level of detail, but you can override that. So if you require more information, you have the flexibility to do that. And also importantly, if you download the 8+3 template, this roster of questions, it comes in a certain Word or PDF format, and you can also obviously change the layout and design of that. You can put in an Excel file, you can put in a PDF, you can put in an online tool, whatever is your own approach to that. So ample flexibility for those who use it. And that's also important what it's for. It's primarily designed for narrative project reporting. It's less usable for program or core budget support, where then the partners have to provide reporting about. It can be used, but then the questions would, only very few questions would apply to that. It can be used for that, but its main intention is actually narrative project reporting. Now, on the next slide, when I already speak about the limitations, the next slide shows you some of the things that the template does not cover or does not address. As I said, it's about narrative reporting, so financial reporting is not touched by using the 8+3 template. It also doesn't, affect the way you do partner capacity assessments or any other due diligence exercises prior to working with partners. It also doesn't change, specific data collection approaches you have or certain data points that you require from your partners. You can add that, and there's no restriction in that way. The 8+3 template comes with kind of a standardized basic log frame, but donors or users have the opportunity to use the log frame they generally use. So there's no need to there's no requirement to use that specific log frame that is in the 8+3 template, you can continue to use your own, which I think is also important. And the last point is, its linkage to the proposal stage. Now, obviously, if you request information at the end of a project, that also determines to a certain extent what information is required in the proposal stage. But nevertheless, there's no direct linkage which determines, if you report using the 8+3 template, your proposal has to look like this. Obviously, there's a link, but it's not fully determined. So there is freedom in this kind of in these 5 different areas, which is important because a lot of concern from donors we spoke with is that it just restricts them too much in these areas. But from my position and also from experience, that's not the case, because you have full flexibility across these areas and also on the points that I mentioned earlier. With this, I'm switching to the good practices that are ideally followed using the template. On the left side, this cover is actually the cover of a document which you can download on the website. I'll briefly show you in a minute. And there you have all these points in much more detail. So it's greatly advised to look at this guidance before using and developing your own basically reporting template based on the 8+3 one. So please do consult the template guidance. And then you basically need to look at the questions that are relevant to your own information needs, and then create your own customized template in your own design with the own level of detail that's required for your purposes. Now, with this flexibility, I think the key part is that you should not change the wording of the questions and the instructions for partners. The template, the menu of questions, of 14 questions, 8+6, basically consists of 2 parts. One is the actual question, and the second part are instructions. And the instructions for partners detail what information the partner should provide when answering this question. So simply putting a 1-sentence question doesn't help the partners much. It's really the instructions for partners which are important. So the wording of the questions and the wording of the instructions for partners should not change, and it should always be included, because that's what really helps the partners to provide accurate information at the required level of detail. And then the last, or the next 2 bullet points, there is a need to basically select the questions appropriate for the purpose of reporting at a certain stage of a project. So for progress reports, ideally you reduce the level of detail and you reduce the number of questions. As I said before, not all of the questions in the template are applicable to that. And for final reports, then again, the same, where it probably makes more sense to max out. Some questions such as risk management or sustainability simply lend themselves to a final report. And then the last bit is not really related to the 8+3 template, but also something that should be kept in mind is, a great contributor to the burden felt by partners is the high frequency of reporting. So when introducing the template, it's an opportunity to also rethink at what level of frequency reports are required from partners. So I'm almost done. Very briefly, some final points, which hopefully came through, which you can see on the next slide. Yes. I mean, the first part is basically what Martin already said. It's a fairly simple way of of action towards commitment 9.1 or commitment 9. And the more organizations use the template, the better, because the more it is known in the humanitarian system, the wider the benefits are for the larger number of users. That's fairly simple. And it's actually fairly easy to do that. You need to review your reporting practices compared with the questions, and then simply select the questions that match what you've done before, and then use that as your new reporting template. It's actually fairly easy. And one thing that I also want to emphasize is that, because I've spoken about donors many, and it's not necessarily for bilateral donors already. Many NGOs, in particular international NGOs or international implementing partners, work with other partners, local organizations, and they also tend to have high reporting requirements. So it's not only from bilateral donor to international NGO, or from bilateral donor to directly to local organization where this could be used, but it can also be something that is, if it's within the humanitarian system, for international NGOs who work with other organizations to use it as well, so that their partners also see the benefits of this template. And then the last point is something that I also want to emphasize. I think the spirit of commitment 9 is to simplify and harmonize reporting. The A+3 template is one way of doing it. There's a great, there's a great way of simply reducing the frequency. If you cut the frequency in half, you obviously reduce the level of, or the amount of reports required by the same number. So reducing the frequency is one, and also keeping reporting which is already harmonized is also something I think that is important. So personally, the A+3 template is a means to achieve an end, and the end is to simplify and harmonize reporting. So if you have instances where a partner already has one report which is accepted by a range of donors, it wouldn't make much sense to move away from that and just request bespoke reporting on the A+3 template, because that creates an additional burden, and that's not the intention of the template. So I think this should be the spirit that should be kept in mind using the template. With this, just let me point you to the new website, which you can find in harmonizedreporting.com. You find the template, you find FAQs, you can find download materials, the guidance, the template itself. So you can find basically all the information there. Make this a bookmark for yourself, so you have all the information at hand. But if you can't find any information there, or if any further questions, then just feel free to access the workstream co-conveners or myself. The emails are on the next slide, but you have the contacts from Jeremy, Martin, and I think myself as well. So just please feel free to approach us anytime if you have a question. We're happy to answer your questions as much as we can. And with this, I'm done with my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Jeremy. Thank you.